The television courtroom had witnessed countless bizarre claims over the decades. Litigants who swore their neighbors were spying on them through ventilation systems. Defendants who insisted invisible damage justified thousands in compensation. Plaintiffs who brought psychics as expert witnesses. But nothing, absolutely nothing in Judge Judy Sheindlin's legendary 25-year career had prepared the courtroom for what Karen Mitchell was about to claim with complete, unwavering confidence. When those words left her mouth, the entire room fell into the kind of stunned silence that makes you question whether you actually heard what you think you heard. "Your Honor, my 8-month-old baby witnessed the entire incident and can testify. She told me exactly what happened. The cameras captured every jaw-dropping second." Judge Judy's pen literally froze mid-note. The bailiff did an actual double-take. Even the court stenographer paused her typing to make sure her ears were working properly. And Karen Mitchell, standing there with her designer diaper bag and her baby balanced on her hip, looked around the courtroom with the kind of smug satisfaction that could only come from someone who genuinely believed she had just played an ace that would win her the entire case. What happened in the next 17 minutes wasn't just a courtroom ruling. It wasn't just another entitled person getting their comeuppance. What Judge Judy did was so medically precise, so psychologically devastating, and so ultimately necessary that it became the most controversial and most shared courtroom moment in daytime television history. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane and why you need to watch every second of what's coming. This wasn't about a lying plaintiff trying to scam the system. This wasn't about someone making up a ridiculous story for sympathy. What was actually happening in that courtroom was so much darker, so much more dangerous, and so much more heartbreaking than anyone realized until Judge Judy exposed the terrifying truth that would bring Child Protective Services into the building before Karen even made it to the parking lot. Before we dive into the most jaw-dropping case in Judge Judy history, you need to smash that like button right now if you're ready to see entitled delusion meet brutal medical reality on national television. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell because what you're about to witness will restore your faith in the justice system and make you question everything you thought you knew about maternal instinct versus mental health crisis. Drop a comment and tell me the craziest excuse you've ever heard someone make in their own defense, because trust me, nothing will top what you're about to see. And stick around until the end because the twist that happens 6 minutes into this case will leave you absolutely speechless. The case seemed straightforward enough on the surface, at least according to the filing paperwork that had crossed Judge Judy's desk 3 weeks earlier. Karen Mitchell versus Jessica Martinez. A simple property damage dispute worth $2,500. Karen was suing her apartment neighbor for allowing her dog to destroy an expensive designer stroller and, according to the claim, traumatizing her infant daughter in the process. Standard small claims court material. A disagreement between neighbors that probably started with a minor incident and escalated through weeks of passive-aggressive hallway encounters and angry notes left on doors. The kind of petty dispute that Judge Judy had resolved thousands of times before with her signature blend of common sense and zero tolerance for nonsense. But Judge Judy's experienced eyes had caught something in the initial paperwork that made her lean back in her chair with that knowing look her staff had learned to recognize over the years. Something about Karen's written statement didn't just seem exaggerated. It seemed detached from reality in a way that triggered alarm bells refined through decades of dealing with every type of human dysfunction imaginable. Karen Mitchell was 38 years old and described herself on the court documents as a full-time mother and social media influencer, though a quick check of her online presence revealed exactly 73 followers and a feed full of increasingly concerning posts about her genius baby who was going to make them both famous. She lived in a modest apartment complex in the suburbs, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business and minor disputes become major drama through the building's Facebook group. According to testimonials from other residents that Judge Judy's team had quietly gathered, Karen had filed 12 formal complaints with building management in just 6 months. Noise violations that other residents couldn't hear. Parking disputes over spaces that weren't assigned. Accusations of harassment that security cameras consistently failed to corroborate. She had been banned from 3 local Facebook mom groups for spreading medical misinformation and insisting that traditional pediatricians were conspiring to suppress the truth about advanced infant development. The defendant, Jessica Martinez, was a 34-year-old ICU nurse who worked double shifts at the local hospital and shared her small apartment with an 8-pound Yorkie named Buttons. The dog was a certified therapy animal that Jessica had gotten after particularly brutal months during the pandemic, and according to every other resident in the building, the tiny dog was sweet, well-behaved, and spent most of its time sleeping on Jessica's couch. Jessica's court filings painted a picture of escalating harassment from a neighbor who seemed determined to cause problems where none existed. The alleged stroller incident had never happened according to building security footage. But more importantly, Jessica's statement revealed something that made Judge Judy pay very close attention. This lawsuit came exactly 1 week after Jessica had politely asked Karen to stop blocking the building's main entrance with her massive stroller, a request that apparently Karen had interpreted as a declaration of war. The courtroom buzzed with its usual electric energy as the cameras began rolling, capturing what the production team assumed would be another routine neighborhood dispute for the millions of Americans watching from their living rooms. The audience had settled into their seats, production assistants completed their final checks, and the bailiff took his position near the bench. Judge Judy reviewed her notes one last time, her experienced eyes scanning the details of a case that she already knew was going to veer into unprecedented territory. This was supposed to be Karen Mitchell's moment of triumph. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for this day, absolutely convinced that she had figured out the perfect strategy to win her case and humiliate her neighbor on national television. She had practiced her arguments in front of her bathroom mirror, rehearsed her outraged expressions, and most importantly, she had her secret weapon. Her 8-month-old daughter Sophia, who she affectionately called Sophie the genius baby, secured in a carrier on her hip, blissfully unaware that her mother was about to use her as the centerpiece of the most delusional courtroom claim in television history. Karen strutted into the courtroom like a conquering hero, her blonde highlights fresh from the salon, her outfit carefully chosen to project the image of a put-together suburban mother under attack from unreasonable neighbors. She carried a designer diaper bag that probably cost more than Jessica's monthly rent and clutched a leather portfolio that she believed contained irrefutable evidence of her neighbor's crimes. She shot confident glances at the cameras, already imagining herself going viral for all the right reasons, becoming the heroic mother who stood up for her baby's rights against the system. She had told her few remaining friends that she was going to make Judge Judy look foolish, that this case would launch her influencer career, that people would finally recognize what she had known all along. Her baby was special, exceptional, extraordinary, and the world needed to acknowledge it. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her signature no-nonsense approach, her voice cutting through the courtroom with the precision of a scalpel honed over thousands of cases. Ms. Mitchell, you're suing Miss Martinez for $2,500, claiming her dog damaged your stroller and traumatized your infant daughter. Tell me exactly what happened. It was a simple, straightforward question, the kind Judge Judy had asked 10,000 times before in cases just like this one. But Karen's response immediately signaled that this case was going to be anything but ordinary. She didn't just answer the question. She launched into a theatrical performance that would have made amateur actors cringe, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sophistication that screamed insecurity masquerading as superiority. Your Honor, this woman's vicious animal completely destroyed my limited edition designer stroller through pure negligence and carelessness, Karen began, her free hand gesturing dramatically while her baby gnawed contentedly on a teething ring, completely oblivious to being used as a prop in her mother's performance. But then came the first red flag that made Judge Judy's eyebrows raise slightly, that subtle warning sign that experienced viewers had learned to recognize as the moment before everything went sideways. Instead of sticking to the facts of what allegedly happened, Karen started editorializing, rolling her eyes dramatically and adding commentary that had nothing to do with the actual incident. As anyone with common sense would know, she continued, pausing as if waiting for the audience to nod in agreement, a responsible pet owner would never allow their animal to run wild in a building where children live. Obviously, she has no respect for other people's property or the safety of innocent babies. Judge Judy's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but her staff and regular viewers could read the signs. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Her pen stopped moving. The polite patience in her voice took on an edge sharp enough to cut glass. Ms. Mitchell, she interrupted, her tone still professional but carrying an unmistakable warning, I didn't ask for your analysis of her character or your opinions about pet ownership. I asked you to tell me what happened to your stroller. The audience could feel the shift in energy, that crackling tension that appears in the air just before lightning strikes. But Karen, completely blinded by her own sense of superiority and convinced that she was intellectually dominating this courtroom, missed the warning entirely. Instead of recognizing that she was skating on increasingly thin ice, she doubled down on her disrespect in a way that made even the cameraman wince. She let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind of dismissive sound reserved for dealing with incompetent store clerks or customer service representatives who weren't understanding her very reasonable demands. Well, if you'll let me finish my story, Your Honor, she said, her voice dripping with condescension that would have made most people's blood run cold. "I was trying to explain the context so you could understand the full situation. Maybe if I could just continue without interruption, this would all make sense." The courtroom went absolutely silent. Even the baby, who had been making happy gurgling sounds, seemed to pause as if sensing that something significant had just happened. In Judge Judy's 25 years of presiding over her courtroom, she had dealt with thousands of difficult litigants, but the sheer audacity of someone actually sighing at her in dismissive frustration and then suggesting that she was the one preventing clarity was something else entirely. Judge Judy leaned forward in her chair, her famous steely gaze locking onto Karen like a heat-seeking missile that had just acquired its target. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees as she spoke, her voice taking on that dangerously quiet tone that made seasoned attorneys break out in cold sweats and had caused more than one cocky defendant to suddenly discover humility. "Excuse me," she said, each word falling like a hammer blow on an anvil, "did you just sigh at me in my courtroom? Did you just suggest that I'm the one preventing this case from proceeding clearly?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread, ready to fall and cut through whatever remained of Karen's misplaced confidence. But incredibly, astonishingly, Karen seemed to think this was still going according to her plan. She had no idea she had just lit the fuse on a legal bomb that was about to explode directly in her face. Karen actually smirked, not just a small smile but a full condescending smirk that screamed her belief that she was dealing with someone who simply didn't understand her superior intellect. She shifted the baby on her hip, using the movement to turn slightly toward the audience as if she was about to share an inside joke with them about how unreasonable this television judge was being. "Your Honor," she said, her tone suggesting she was patiently explaining something to a child who wasn't quite keeping up, "I understand that you deal with simple cases all day, but this situation requires understanding the broader context of neighborhood safety and the special needs of advanced children. My daughter isn't just any baby. She's exceptionally gifted, and what happened to her goes beyond simple property damage." Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but everyone in that courtroom could feel the storm building behind her carefully controlled exterior. "Let's start with the basic facts, Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had already spotted every hole in the story but was giving the plaintiff just enough rope to hang herself. "Your stroller was damaged. You claim this happened because of Miss Martinez's dog. What evidence do you have that her dog was responsible for this damage?" Karen's face lit up with the kind of excitement that comes from someone who believes they're about to play their winning card, completely oblivious to the fact that they're actually revealing the extent of their delusion to millions of viewers. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had practiced, the moment that she was convinced would validate everything she had been saying for months. "I have an eyewitness, Your Honor," Karen announced triumphantly, pausing for dramatic effect like a prosecutor in a legal thriller revealing the surprise witness that would crack the case wide open. "A completely reliable witness who saw the entire incident and can tell you exactly what that vicious dog did to my baby's stroller while my precious Sophie was still strapped inside, terrified and traumatized by this woman's negligence." Judge Judy's pen was poised over her notepad, ready to record the witness information, perhaps expecting Karen to name another neighbor or a building employee who had seen the alleged incident. "And who is this witness, Ms. Mitchell?" Judge Judy asked, her voice still professional, still giving Karen every opportunity to walk back from whatever cliff she was approaching. "Where can we find this person to corroborate your version of events?" Karen's smile grew even wider, and she actually lifted her baby slightly higher as if presenting evidence to the court, her voice filled with absolute certainty and zero self-awareness about how insane her next words were going to sound. "My witness is right here, Your Honor," she declared, gesturing to the 8-month-old infant who was now drooling contentedly on her shoulder, completely oblivious to the fact that she was being volunteered as a courtroom witness. "My daughter Sophie saw everything. She was in the stroller when it happened. She experienced the whole traumatic event. And she told me exactly what happened. She told me that the dog attacked her stroller, that she was terrified, that she's been having nightmares about it ever since. My baby doesn't lie, Your Honor. Children are pure truth-tellers, and she witnessed this crime." The courtroom erupted in a chaos of confused murmuring, shocked gasps, and a few nervous laughs from audience members who genuinely couldn't tell if this was some kind of elaborate joke. The bailiff's mouth literally fell open. The stenographer stopped typing and looked up to make sure she had heard correctly before committing those words to the official record. Jessica Martinez, standing at the defendant's table, put her hand over her mouth in disbelief, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and concern. Even the baby, seemingly sensing the change in atmosphere, stopped chewing on her teething ring and looked around with the blank, innocent expression of an infant who has no idea she's just been dragged into the most bizarre courtroom claim in television history. But the most telling reaction came from Judge Judy herself, who slowly, deliberately set down her pen and folded her hands on the bench in front of her, staring at Karen with an expression that combined disbelief, concern, and the dawning realization that this case had just transformed from a simple property dispute into something far more serious and potentially dangerous. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy said slowly, her voice carrying a note of carefully controlled concern that her regular viewers had rarely heard in 25 years of broadcasts, "your daughter is 8 months old. Is that correct?" The question seemed simple enough, a basic clarification of facts that any reasonable person would answer with a straightforward yes. But Karen, still riding high on her belief that she had just presented unassailable evidence, heard the question as an opportunity to further establish her daughter's exceptional nature and her own superior understanding of child development. "Yes, Your Honor, but you need to understand that Sophie isn't your average 8-month-old, Karen replied, her voice taking on the lecturing tone of someone who believed they were educating an ignorant audience. "She's been extraordinarily advanced since birth. She made eye contact at 2 weeks, she was tracking objects at 1 month, and she's been communicating with me in meaningful ways since she was 5 months old. I've done extensive research on gifted infant development, and everything I've read confirms that some babies are simply operating on a different level than their peers." Judge Judy's expression remained neutral, but her next question came with surgical precision, designed to expose the absurdity of Karen's claim while giving her every opportunity to recognize her own delusion. "Ms. Mitchell, how many actual words can your daughter speak? Actual recognizable words that any person listening could identify as language?" Karen's confident expression flickered for just a moment before she doubled down on her fantasy, her free hand gesturing emphatically while her baby continued to drool and babble completely normal infant sounds. "Well, she doesn't speak to just anyone, Your Honor," Karen explained, as if this were a completely reasonable statement. "She has very high standards for communication. She's selective about who she shares her verbal abilities with. But when we're alone, when she feels safe and comfortable with me, her mother, the person she trusts most in this world, she speaks in complete sentences. She tells me about her day, her feelings, her observations about the world around her. Just yesterday she told me that she didn't like the texture of her sweet potato puree and would prefer the butternut squash instead." The courtroom had gone from confused murmuring to dead silence, the kind of heavy quiet that settles over a space when people realize they're witnessing something that goes beyond typical courtroom drama into territory that feels genuinely concerning. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Karen's face, studying her with the intensity of someone trying to determine whether they were dealing with a calculating liar or something far more troubling. "And this communication about the dog incident," Judge Judy continued, her voice carefully measured, "your daughter told you in words that the dog attacked her stroller? She described this event to you verbally?" Karen's head bobbed enthusiastically, completely missing or deliberately ignoring the trap that Judge Judy was methodically constructing around her delusional claims. "Absolutely, Your Honor," Karen confirmed, reaching into her designer diaper bag to pull out a journal with a cover decorated in pastel flowers and baby footprints. "I keep detailed records of everything Sophie tells me because I know that one day, when the world recognizes her gifts, this documentation will be important." She flipped through pages covered in handwriting, holding the journal up as if it were legal evidence that would be admissible in court. "Right here, on the day of the incident, Sophie told me, and I quote from her exact words, 'The bad doggy scared me, Mommy. It jumped at my carriage and made loud noises. I was very frightened.' Those were her exact words, which I transcribed immediately after she told me because I wanted to preserve her testimony while it was fresh." Judge Judy reached out her hand, gesturing for the journal, and Karen handed it over with the confidence of someone presenting the smoking gun that would win their case. Judge Judy flipped through several pages, her expression growing more concerned with each entry she read. The journal was filled with elaborate conversations allegedly conducted between Karen and her infant daughter, discussions about philosophy, observations about human nature, even political opinions that the baby had supposedly expressed. Each entry was dated and timed with obsessive precision, creating a record of a fantasy world where an 8-month-old infant was operating at the cognitive level of an adult. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy said, setting the journal down on the bench in front of her, "have you shown this journal to your pediatrician? Have you discussed your daughter's alleged verbal abilities with any medical professional who specializes in child development?" Karen's expression shifted from confident to defensive in an instant, her body language becoming closed off and combative in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time someone had questioned her claims about her daughter's abilities. "I don't need doctors telling me about my own child, Your Honor," she said, her voice rising slightly in pitch and volume. "I know my daughter better than any so-called expert who's only met her for 15-minute appointments. These pediatricians, they're working from outdated models of development. They don't want to acknowledge gifted children because it challenges their standardized charts and timelines. I've found plenty of research online that supports everything I'm experiencing with Sophie. There are forums full of mothers who have advanced babies just like mine, and we all recognize that the medical establishment refuses to acknowledge what we know to be true." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed, and everyone in that courtroom who had watched her show for years recognized the expression that appeared on her face. It was the look she got when she had seen enough, heard enough, and was about to deliver a verbal destruction so complete and so devastating that it would be shared millions of times across every social media platform within hours of the show airing. But this time, there was something different in her expression, something beyond her usual impatience with liars and con artists. There was genuine concern, the kind that appears when someone recognizes that they're not dealing with malicious deception but with something far more tragic and potentially dangerous. A mother who had become so disconnected from reality that she couldn't distinguish between her baby's normal infant babbling and actual human speech, who had constructed an elaborate fantasy world where her child possessed impossible abilities, who had isolated herself in online echo chambers that reinforced her delusions instead of helping her get the psychiatric help she desperately needed. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy said, her voice taking on a tone that combined authority with an undercurrent of concern that made even Karen pause in her defensive posturing, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen very carefully. Your 8-month-old daughter cannot speak in sentences. She cannot tell you what happened during an incident. She cannot testify as a witness in this or any other legal proceeding. What you are describing is not just unlikely or exaggerated. It is medically, scientifically, and developmentally impossible. Babies at 8 months make sounds. They babble. They might say mama or dada if you're lucky. But they do not speak in complete sentences. They do not have conversations. They do not express complex thoughts verbally. This is not my opinion. This is not me being closed-minded or stuck in old ways of thinking. This is an established medical fact supported by decades of research conducted by thousands of pediatric specialists around the world." Karen's face had begun to flush red, her eyes showing the first signs of tears, but not tears of sadness or realization. These were tears of frustration and anger, the kind that appear when someone's carefully constructed fantasy is being challenged by reality and they're fighting desperately to maintain their delusion. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking slightly but still defiant. "You're just like all the others. You can't see what's right in front of you because it doesn't fit into your narrow view of what's possible. My daughter is special. She's gifted. And just because you've never encountered a child like her doesn't mean she doesn't exist. Maybe if you'd kept up with current child development research instead of just judging people on television for the past 20 years, you'd understand that everything is changing, that children today are more advanced than previous generations." Judge Judy rose slightly from her chair, a movement so deliberate and commanding that it instantly silenced every whisper in the courtroom. The expression on her face had transformed from judicial authority into something far more serious, a look that conveyed she was no longer simply presiding over a property dispute but was about to make a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of this case and possibly save a child's life. "Ms. Mitchell," she began, her voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone that had made courtroom veterans hold their breath for decades, "I want you to answer this question with complete honesty, and I want you to think very carefully before you respond. Do you genuinely, truly, in your heart believe that your 8-month-old baby speaks to you in complete sentences? Do you actually hear her forming words and expressing complex thoughts, or are you interpreting her normal baby sounds as language?" Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, her eyes darting around the courtroom as if looking for support or validation from the audience, from the cameras, from anyone who might confirm that she wasn't crazy, that her experiences were real and valid. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence but retained a desperate edge that made her answer even more concerning than Judge Judy had anticipated. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger, "yes, I do believe it. I know what I hear. I know what my daughter tells me. Why won't anyone believe me? Why is everyone trying to make me feel like I'm losing my mind? I'm her mother. I know her better than anyone else possibly could. She trusts me with her words, with her thoughts, with her fears. That dog traumatized her, and she told me so with her own voice, and I won't let anyone tell me that what I experienced isn't real. The courtroom had moved beyond uncomfortable silence into something approaching collective concern. Even audience members who had come expecting entertainment were now leaning forward with worried expressions, recognizing that they were witnessing something that transcended typical daytime television drama. This wasn't a case about a damaged stroller anymore. This was a mental health crisis unfolding in real time on national television, and Judge Judy's next words would determine whether this mother got the help she needed or continued down a dangerous path of escalating delusion. Judge Judy took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of responsibility that went far beyond her usual courtroom rulings. Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to do something I've only done 3 times in my entire career, both as a family court judge in Manhattan and during my years on television. I'm not just dismissing your case. I'm ordering a mandatory psychiatric evaluation before you leave this courthouse today. Karen's face went white, then red, then purple in rapid succession as the words registered in her brain. What? She nearly shrieked, her grip tightening on her baby, who finally started to fuss at the sudden change in her mother's energy. You can't do that. You have no right. This is discrimination. This is illegal. I came here for justice, and you're treating me like I'm insane. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, her voice remaining calm and authoritative as she continued with the most controversial decision of her broadcasting career. Yes, I can do that, and I am doing it right now, Judge Judy stated firmly, gesturing to the bailiff who had already moved closer to Karen's position. And furthermore, I am notifying Child Protective Services to conduct a welfare check on your daughter within the next 24 hours. A social worker is waiting outside this courtroom right now, Ms. Mitchell, because I made arrangements before this hearing even began. The moment I read your case file, the moment I saw your written claims about your infant daughter providing eyewitness testimony, I knew we were dealing with something far more serious than a property dispute. The collective gasp from the audience was audible even over Karen's rising protests. Jessica Martinez, standing at the defendant's table, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock at how dramatically this case had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined when she filed her response to the lawsuit. Karen was fully crying now, but these weren't the tears of someone experiencing a moment of clarity or remorseful recognition. These were the desperate tears of someone whose constructed reality was being forcibly dismantled by an authority figure who refused to validate her delusions. Please, she sobbed, clutching her baby tighter as the infant began to cry in response to her mother's distress. Please don't do this. She's all I have. You can't take my baby away from me. I'm a good mother. I take care of her. I love her more than anything in this world. You have no right to interfere with my family. This is about a stroller. This is about a neighbor's dangerous dog. Why are you making this about my mental health? There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with how I parent my daughter. Judge Judy's voice softened slightly, but her resolve remained absolute. Ms. Mitchell, a mother who genuinely cannot distinguish between infant babbling and human speech is a mother who may not be able to accurately assess her child's actual needs. A mother who has created an elaborate fantasy about her baby's abilities and has isolated herself in online communities that reinforce those delusions instead of encouraging professional help is a mother who needs intervention. This isn't about punishing you. This isn't about humiliating you on television. This is about making sure that the baby in your arms is safe, properly cared for, and that you get the help you clearly need. The journal you showed me isn't evidence of your daughter's gifts. It's evidence that you're experiencing a serious disconnect from reality, and that disconnect could put your child at risk. The bailiff had reached Karen's side, speaking to her in low, gentle tones, trying to de-escalate her rising panic while ensuring she understood that compliance wasn't optional. A woman in professional attire entered from the side door, introducing herself as Dr. Patricia Chen, a clinical psychologist who specialized in postpartum mental health issues. Her presence had been arranged by Judge Judy's team after their preliminary review of the case file had raised red flags that went far beyond typical litigant exaggeration. Dr. Chen approached Karen with the practiced calm of someone who had dealt with mental health crises many times before, her voice soothing and non-threatening as she explained what would happen next. Ms. Mitchell, I'm here to help you, not to judge you or take your baby away. We're going to go to a quiet room where we can talk privately about what you've been experiencing. Your daughter will be with you the entire time. This evaluation is about making sure both of you are healthy and safe. Judge Judy delivered her final ruling with the authority of someone who knew this decision would be debated, criticized, and analyzed for years to come but who also knew it was absolutely necessary. This case is dismissed. Ms. Mitchell, you will receive nothing in damages. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay Ms. Martinez's court costs in the amount of $1,200 for the time and expense of defending against a claim that had no basis in reality. You will complete the psychiatric evaluation today. You will cooperate fully with the Child Protective Services welfare check within 24 hours. If you refuse any of these conditions, you will be held in contempt of court, and your daughter will be placed in emergency protective custody with a family member until your fitness as a parent can be properly assessed. This isn't negotiable, Ms. Mitchell. This is what's happening right now. As Karen was gently escorted from the courtroom by Dr. Chen and a social worker, still crying but no longer fighting, the baby reaching out her small hands toward the unfamiliar faces around her, the audience sat in stunned silence. This wasn't the satisfying destruction of an entitled villain that they had expected. This was something far more complex and troubling, a woman clearly suffering from some form of postpartum mental health crisis being forced into treatment she desperately needed but vehemently didn't want. Judge Judy addressed the cameras directly, knowing millions were watching and that her decision would generate intense debate. What you just witnessed wasn't entertainment. It was an intervention. Sometimes the law isn't about determining who's right and who's wrong in a property dispute. Sometimes it's about recognizing when someone needs help and having the courage to ensure they get it, even when they can't see that they need it themselves. The verdict came 30 days later, after Karen had undergone intensive psychiatric evaluation and treatment. She was diagnosed with severe postpartum psychosis with delusional features, a condition that had been developing for months but had been hidden from her family and dismissed by online communities that reinforced rather than challenged her increasingly disconnected beliefs. With proper medication and therapy, Karen began the long process of rebuilding her relationship with reality and, more importantly, developing a healthy relationship with her daughter based on who the baby actually was rather than who Karen's illness had convinced her the baby could be. She regained supervised custody after 6 weeks of treatment, issued a tearful public apology to Jessica Martinez, and became an advocate for postpartum mental health awareness, using her viral infamy to help other mothers recognize warning signs before their own delusions put their children at risk. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to understand that mental health intervention isn't cruelty, it's compassion in action.